Shout out to Carol Smith and Aaron Wislang, who are backstage and who are producing the show and who are on board to produce more of them. So the plan is these are going to be monthly episodes. And Carol, I think, am I allowed, tell me in the private chat, am I allowed to reveal the date for the next episode? So let's see if I can jump in there. So the date is May 3rd. Wednesday, May 3rd will be the next episode. We're still working out our guest invitations and the specific topic, so that will remain a mystery. And we'll shortly be adding that event to the Discord and promoting the aka.ms link for the calendar invitation. In fact, I may have that by the end of this episode. So, let's get started. Pino, are you ready?
Yes, great. Very exciting. Let's do it.
Okay, so welcome to Path to CitusCon Episode 2. The topic for today is how to get Postgres ready for the next 100 million users. My name is Claire Giordano. I am one of the co-hosts. I'm here today with Pino de Candia.
Hi, everyone.
Pino is an awesome database person who is joining us from New Orleans today. And we have 4 guests on the show who we want to introduce. But first, I want to thank all of you who were joining in the audience. There's obviously, if you're listening to me, then you're listening to General Stage. But I want to point out that the chat is in the hashtag CitusCon channel, and specifically it's in the Path to CitusCon EO2 thread. Which has a bit more detail about the topic in that thread name too. So there's going to be a live chat happening there while we're having this conversation. So we hope you can join us. And I think I already did the shout out to Carol Smith and Aaron Wislang, who are backstage and are organizing this. If you have any problems with audio or any compliments or feedback, obviously shout out to them. So, and then we are recording this. And there is a code of conduct as well that you can find at aka.ms/cituscon-conduct. But the recording will go online on YouTube in the next 24 to 48 hours also, for anybody who joins late and wants to listen to the rest of it. So without further ado, let's welcome our guests. So the first guest I want to welcome is Melanie Plageman, who's a senior software engineer, a Postgres contributor, who is focused on I/O performance and I/O observability. And she works on the Postgres open source team here at Microsoft.
Hi.
Welcome. And Samay Sharma is here as well. He's an engineering leader on the Postgres open source team at Microsoft, and he has in his past life worked with a lot of customers to optimize the performance of their Postgres deployments and their Citus deployments too. I first met Samay when he worked for Citus Data before the Microsoft acquisition.
Hi, everybody.
Go.
And maybe I'll jump in here and introduce Abdullah Ustuner. Abdullah is an engineering manager for the Citus open source team, and he's based in Europe. Hi, Abdullah.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be here.
And we also are lucky to have Burak Yucasoy as our guest. Burak is a principal engineer who works on the Azure Cosmos DB for PostgreSQL managed service team at Azure. It's basically Citus on Azure. Hi, Burak.
Yeah, hi, everyone.
And Burak is also a new dad, so I'm hoping he's not too sleep deprived today.
No, I'm fine.
Good. It's always good to sleep.
Yeah.
So when Pino and I were chit-chatting about how to start this conversation, obviously we're looking to the future and like how to get Postgres ready for the next 100 million users, but we thought we might start by looking backwards in time and chat a little bit about what your various first versions of Postgres were, like when you first got involved with Postgres. Start with you, Melanie.
Well, actually using 9.6 was my first version of Postgres that I used, and I got interested in the C language extension framework. And so I don't actually remember what features of Postgres outside of being able to write extensions that I thought were really cool. But that was the first version that I used.
Awesome. And Samai?
Yeah, mine was 9.2. So I my first kind of Postgres project was writing the first version of Mongo FTW as an intern. So I started working on that. So like Melanie, I also came into the ecosystem via extensions. And after that, I thought it was really cool at that time that you could use Postgres to query other databases, and Postgres provided the ability to do that with foreign data wrappers. So that got me interested, and yeah, and after that, I worked on a bunch of other stuff too.
I'm very glad you became an intern at Citus. And that sealed your future with Postgres.
Yeah, I did. I didn't know I was making such a big decision at that time, but I'm happy with that decision.
What's your story, Pino? I know you're not a guest, you're a host, but I'm curious.
Yeah,
When did you?
sure. So I first got involved with PostgreSQL in mid 2020 when I joined Azure to work on the control plane for Citus on Azure, and my database experience was pretty limited before that. I did in 2004 through 2007 work on Amazon's Dynamo. This was not the DynamoDB that's the AWS service, but the Dynamo that hosted the Amazon shopping cart back then, and we wrote a paper about that. But that was an early NoSQL database, and so PostgreSQL was exciting for me because and Citus was exciting because it's a relational database that's distributed.
Cool. What about you, Barak?
Well, to be honest, I don't remember the first version that I started to use Postgres, but the first version that I worked on as a developer was 9.4. And similar to Samai, I also started to work as Postgres with an extension, a Citus extension. And then I also I kind of fall in love with the Postgres extension ecosystem, and for a brief period of time, I was also maintainer of a Hyperlog extension. So yeah, that's how I started to work with Postgres.
And for people in the audience not familiar with Hyperlog, or some of us call it HLL, quick definition.
So basically it is it introduced a new data structure which allows you to calculate count distinct queries in a very fast and memory efficient manner. So normally to calculate count distinct, you need to keep the big list of data in memory. But with Hyperlog or HLL, if you are okay with some mathematically bounded error rate, it can give you an approximate result in very fast fashion.
All right. And then Abdullah, just to set context, when did you first get started with Postgres? What was your first version?
Let's see. For me, I think it was late 2021. At the time, we were building a low-code application platform, and we decided to go with Postgres at the time. I think it was version 13. So compared to others, my introduction to Postgres has been relatively recent. And until a couple months ago, I have been on the other side of the fence, really kind of using Postgres for our product lines. And since February, I've joined the Citus team, and now kind of working on closer to the technology itself.
Cool. So it's
Yeah,
actually.
can I interrupt you for a second? I'd love to know, get the same answer from you. I know you've been involved with Postgres for a long time, and you're a great advocate for it.
I got involved in the 9.x days as well. I think it was 2017, April 2017. And I had no idea how much I would enjoy being part of the Postgres community. I remember going to my first PGConf with trepidation. It was in Lisbon, and I wasn't sure what to expect, and I wasn't sure if it would be clubby or clicky? Would I be welcome? Would it be inclusive? And I made friends and started to get to know people even outside of the Citus team that, I was part of at that point. So, 2017.
And I do have to say, I dropped it in the chat, but for the audience, for the audio audience, Claire was on PostgreSQL Person of the Week recently, so I dropped a link to that, but you can also just search Claire Giordano, PostgreSQL Person of the Week, which I think is a great honor.
Well, Andreas Scherbaum started the Postgres Person of the Week thing back in the beginning of 2020. I think it was right before COVID hit. And he does these written interviews, and there's a new Postgres Person of the Week every single week. He's actually got quite a backlog now, and he's always looking for new recommendations of new people. He's trying to be as inclusive as possible, and so there's a lot of us that have been Postgres Person of the Week, and it's really fun because you learn things about people in this global community that you didn't know about. Melanie, you've done one of those, haven't you?
Yeah, in 2020, I think.
Awesome. And I think Samai, I thought I saw an interview for you as Postgres Person of the Week too. Is that right?
Yeah, mine went out a month ago in March, I think.
Oh,
I think
okay.
what's interesting is as part of doing the interview, Andreas asks you to recommend, 4 or 5 more people to interview, which I think is really cool because that kind of increases the graph of people he could interview. So I found that to be an interesting thing.
So I think we probably should pivot to the reason for today, which is how to get Postgres to the next 100 million users. But we did have 2 more pre-things that we wanted to talk about. Because Postgres 16's code freeze has been just happening over the last couple of weeks. And of course, Postgres 15 feels like it released yesterday. Although it wasn't yesterday, it was probably 6 months ago now. I'm just curious whether there are any recent Postgres features that any of you think are the cat's meow, that you think are amazing, that might be new to people in the audience. Who wants to jump in first?
I'll jump in. Like, it's not a specific feature, but I really love the improvements regarding logical replication in Postgres, because I think it is like all these improvements are setting stage for something quite big in future releases, both in Postgres and also as an extension or as what you can do with Postgres. Because when you have a logical replication setup, and like if it's satisfies certain preconditions, then you can do lots of cool stuff like bidirectional replication or zero downtime failovers or zero downtime upgrades. So like I think it's not fully ready yet, but I think it will be a huge thing when all these little pieces come together, and it would allow us to create and do lots of awesome things with Postgres.
On that note, logical decoding on physical standbys was merged. Now we've had the feature freeze, but not the code freeze. So, I mean, still tentative what's actually in 16, but that was one of the features that's been worked on for years, and that is a pretty huge step forward.
That's actually a really important clarification because we're doing this recording now. It's going to go up on YouTube. And if someone listens to this in 6 months or 12 months and the exact final contents of PG16 changes between now and the release, which will come out when, Melanie? This September, this October?
Usually in September, yeah.
Exactly. So we just want everyone to always go double check what's actually in PG16 when the final release is cut.
Yeah, Melanie and Burak both combined stole my answer, so now I have to think more to give a new answer. But I think one thing which I found really cool for 15 was around the removal of the stats collector and storing stats in shared memory. I mean, I'm very passionate about giving the right data to users so they can decide how to tune their Postgres database and things like that. So I think just that feature allows you to actually store much more statistics. And I think Melanie greatly leveraged that to actually work on pgstat.io for Postgres 16, which is also something which went in. And I think there's room to capture more statistics in pgstat.io and also around, vacuum statistics or checkpoints, etc., in views and tables instead of just in logs. Like more statistics about these things. So I feel that's also very cool, kind of a good base for building many more features on top of.
Yeah, the old stats collector was pretty hard if you wanted to add reliable new statistics as a feature. There's just a lot of aspects of it from an architectural perspective that would make those statistics difficult to act on. So I think actually that's one thing for potential contributors to think about, is that the statistics subsystem now is much easier to add on top of, and there's lots of room for suggesting and proposing new types of statistics. I think just recently we had some contributors from Dalibo propose a whole new set of different types of parallel query statistics for 17. So there's lots of room for that.
Thanks, Melanie. Can I chime in and remind everyone? So this is this live show is a pre-event for CitusCon 2023 that's happening next week on April 18th and 19th, and both Melanie and Samai are going to give talks there. And I'd love for you all to give a quick blurb about what your talk is about. Maybe Melanie, you can start.
Sure, I'm going to talk about the new statistics view in 16 called pgstat.io that I contributed, and it's just going to be about how it gives you additional IO observability in different scenarios where you can use it to sort of understand the causes and potential solutions of different bottlenecks and performance issues in your instance.
Great,
And
thank
your talk is part of the Americas live stream. So it's actually happening. You're delivering it live next Tuesday.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, and my talk, it's a recorded talk, is going to be released next week, but it's titled Optimizing Postgres for Write-Heavy Workloads, featuring checkpoint and wall configs. I think the goal of that talk is, obviously there's a bunch of things you can do in the application side to kind of optimize for your write-heavy workloads. But if you're at the point where you need to squeeze more performance out of Postgres by tuning some of its parameters like max wall size, checkpointing related ones, like wall compression and those kinds of things, BG Writer. So it is going to talk about all of those concepts in terms of how you can squeeze more performance out of Postgres for write-heavy workloads.
Thanks,
Very cool.
Samai. And I guess the recorded talks are going to be available at the start of the event. Is that right, Claire?
Yeah, they all get pushed to public on YouTube probably like 5 minutes before we start. So everything's going to be available to watch starting on Tuesday, except obviously for the EMEA live stream, which is on Wednesday morning European time. Yeah, I'm so excited. All right. So I think it's time to dive into the future and how to get Postgres ready for the next 100 million users. I think I want to start with maybe a user focused perspective. So Samai, you've worked with a ton of Postgres users. Are there any common challenges that people run into that you think future versions of Postgres could avoid?
So I think I'll answer this question in kind of two parts. One of is kind of challenges they run into and how we can resolve them, and also the user profile for Postgres is and for all databases in general is going to evolve over time. So I'll kind of answer that in two parts. I think from a current, one meta topic, instead of going into specific things, is how do you configure Postgres well? I think that's a challenge, common challenge for users. We have a lot of configurations, which is a good thing, but is also makes it like there's not a very clear roadmap or a manual on how exactly all of them interact with each other. What data should you monitor to decide which configs to change? So it's very common to see, tuning mistakes from users. So like some examples, like this release actually David pushed a patch around renaming one of the config parameters because people were using it for a completely different reason than what it was expected, than what it was designed for. Another example is, the auto vacuum max workers, where people, like if your auto vacuum is not catching up, very commonly you'll just up the max workers thinking more parallelism is going to help. And it doesn't unless you also adjust the cost limiting parameters and other things. Work mem also, I mean, if you ideally everybody should read documentation and figure out how exactly to do things, but people run out of memory and then they decide, oh, I'm running out of memory, let me increase my work mem, which actually increases your probability of running into an out of memory, because that's a per operation thing. So if you have a lot of operations and you're saying each operation can use more memory, that leads to kind of more problems. So I feel in general, from a tuning standpoint, we have many configs, and the data we expose from a stats standpoint doesn't really kind of tie you to, okay, this is what you need to change if you see this in your data. And that's also in the documentation for the stats views. We have quite a few statistics documented, but kind of the implication of it for a DBA or a developer, I think we need to do a better job of that. One, I don't know if this is a sub part of this, but I think like memory related statistics are lacking, I feel. So we do have now, like with pgstat.io and other work, like more IO related statistics, but it's hard to estimate how much memory a query will be using. And by extension, it's hard to actually make sure that it uses that much by setting limits and whatnot. Workmem is kind of per operation, so it's not necessarily giving you a good bound on how much a particular query can use. So I feel these are kind of just problems which users keep facing around tuning and optimizing Postgres, which is why I give talks around this topic, because I feel you can squeeze a lot more from Postgres. I'll kind of make another small point around the changing user base, right? So I mean, previously, like I've been working with customers for 7 to 8 years, and previously users used to have DBAs and folks who kind of understood their full-time job was to maintain and manage databases. That's also very on-prem centric view, which is over time moved to cloud. And in the cloud environment, where more and more users are now running Postgres on the cloud, so it's easier to run instances or to get instances. So people don't necessarily invest as much time in understanding all of these concepts. So I think that's something we as a community and as a product, and not just the product as in Postgres core, but also the managed services around it, need to evolve to make it easier for such users to make the right decisions around their Postgres setup. So yeah, that I would say is the main things which I feel are challenges.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack.
I also, so I'm just going to say, I think that defining what you mean by the next 100 million users is important, because like if we're talking about 100 million users that are going to migrate from other existing databases and are even somewhat sophisticated, like I would say, like, but if we're just talking about numbers, that's different. Like, are we talking about people that are in college and they, for their project, are they going to choose MySQL or Postgres? Like, that's a totally different set of problems. Like, my sister-in-law is in college and used MySQL instead of Postgres because she couldn't figure out how to deal with the pghba.conf, right? Like, and MySQL made it easier. So I think it's really important, like what kind of question we're asking. We work for cloud providers, like most of the people on this panel, so we have a totally biased version of this, but like the question is, which 100 million users are you talking about, right?
Well, that's a really good question, and I suppose it's up to us. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if we fast forward 10 years, all those people in college now are not going to be in college anymore. And they are, if they're building applications, going to be choosing a database to run it on. And so I think we have to care about usability and getting started and those kinds of roadblocks that they're going to run into, as well as the fact that, people who are experienced change companies, move jobs, start companies, and they're making decisions as to which database to go to as well. And are they going to choose Postgres or not? And if so, why?
Bring up a very good point, Melanie. I think for users who essentially are not using cloud providers, there's still like their challenges are going to be more around, failover, auto failover, failure detection, all of that. Like, how do we set up HA properly? How do we set up, backups and restores properly? We do have some components in Postgres, but I personally would like to see more of those problems kind of solved in Postgres. Because there are tools around it, but I mean there are quite a few, and people often don't know which one to pick, and if they pick it, they don't know which one to kind of how to use it and whatnot. So I think if we can solve some of those problems in core, I think in the longer term that's probably better.
And on the open source team, we mostly hear from people that are sophisticated enough to like email a mailing list, right? So there's a bunch of different biases in terms of what users we're actually serving.
Yeah,
What do you
I think one similar aspect or one other way to think about this is that I think the future users will be more demanding because the like 10 years ago the community was not that big. Like you could attend the conference and you would meet like lots of almost all key people in the community. And when the community is smaller, I think people are usually more forgiving or they are more willing to look past from the problems they hit. And I think as the community gets bigger, like people will be more demanding. They will, like for example, similar to what Samay said, they will want Postgres to be more easier to use, or like they want HA to be set up much more easily. And I think they will demand this in a good way because like today we are boasting about how PostgreSQL is very reliable and greatest database of all, and I think that increases the expectation, and I think it is up to us as a whole Postgres community to satisfy or live up with that expectation.
Just to add to what Burak just mentioned, in addition to expectations, I think one pattern I have noticed, and I spend a lot of my time on the other side of the fence, building applications, services that actually use different, database platforms. One challenge I see is teams and engineers who get started on a project don't necessarily know all the different requirements, all the different needs they will eventually have when they get started. It may be a prototype stage, it may be an incubation stage, and what happens usually I see is people kind of lean on their muscle memory, based on like what experience they might have with a different DB or somebody in their team, and with limited knowledge about what they may need going down the line, it's really hard to choose Postgres or some other platform, and how to even get started. So I think in terms of like documentation may not be the right term here, but for somebody who's starting on a project, like how can we guide them? How can we make it easier for them to choose and to get started and to better understand as their needs evolve, to a more advanced stage, how they can start configuring and tuning their systems accordingly. I think that's going to be one of the, differentiating points, I hope, for Postgres.
And I think, sorry, I was just going to say, I think one of the things is people are, I mean, I see, blogs all the time saying using Postgres for X, Postgres for Y and whatnot. And I think that ties to Burak's point of, users getting more demanding because now Postgres has a very diverse user base. Like people are using it for queues, for Mongo replacement, for running NoSQL like workloads, for running traditional OLTP workloads, for OLAP workloads. So I think just the demands are very diverse as well, in addition to just being kind of just more demands, but they're also coming from a very diverse audience.
So I'm trying to figure out how much of our time today we should spend thinking about those users who are just getting started, or those today's college students who are tomorrow's co-founders of startups, who are tomorrow's leaders even in large organizations. So you mentioned your sister-in-law, Melanie. Like, do you have strong opinions about things we should do in the Postgres world to make it easier for people to choose Postgres to begin with?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that we could do. I think some of them I just, from her experience, like using MySQL, the initial experience was better. And I think there are things that we can do, but it's also a question of like, how do we spend our time as developers, right? Like the ecosystem, the number of people working on the ecosystem and core together, it's like a pretty small number of people if you compare it to, yes, we have a lot of contributors, but like there's actually so much work to do, right? So like the total number of people, if you compare it to like SQL Server or something like that, we have a lot. So we really have to prioritize. And I think one thing that Samai says pretty often is that like we could be more data driven here in terms of how do we like, what are the different interest groups or segments that are relevant here, like, and what are their needs, and so how should we spend the time, given that we definitely don't have infinite time, right? So like I think the example of, you know, for example, people be like, a small technical thing that I thought of earlier was, okay, well, as people's requirements change for their Postgres and running Postgres instance, like they want to change their configuration, they want to, you know, change various things. And like, even that sometimes is not that easy. There are certain gucks that you can't change without restarting your database, right? Like, and that's something that is for technical reasons, and something that like for some of those things we could actually change. But it's like, is that the most important thing, or is it more important that we adjust some of the systems around like auto vacuuming and buffer pool management to make them like more like feedback driven, or like based on the workload and that kind of thing? So there's like so many things we could do, and essentially how we choose what we work on as people contributing is pretty haphazard, right?
So I'm curious, is the origin for where we are now that the Postgres community is focused on production workloads and being perhaps very extensible and and on experts, and so do you see signs that will start changing direction and accommodating new user types?
Well, what would be the forcing factor for that, right? Like we're getting paid by companies, either cloud platforms or like you have to think about incentive structures, right?
So maybe the answer is that some of the communities that surround Postgres can help do some of that work, like Kubernetes integrations, like Patroni, or cloud services, can help close the gap in difficulty. And maybe
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, even talking to authors of extensions that are the extension ecosystem, so not so much like Citus, but more like I'm giving Dalibo as an example because I've talked to them recently about this, but they maintain, you know, a dozen extensions that are used by their customers for different random things, like, you know, looking at queries visually or query plans visually, or doing things with authentication or whatever. And they have lots of things that they would like to see changed so make their work easier, but the extension ecosystem and is like, it's less centralized than like the hackers mailing list or whatever. So I think that the other parts of the Postgres ecosystem outside of just people working on core and people requesting features that would go in core, like I think they were describing that they feel like that ecosystem could be organized maybe in a different way.
And I think one thing to add to what Melanie said, Pino, is also one of the ways to solve this problem is to find ways to make it easier for newer people to contribute to Postgres, whether in core, whether via extensions, or by building tooling around it, as you suggested. So I think that's also one of the problems we will need to solve as a community, is how do we get more diverse people with diverse backgrounds, application developers, to bring that perspective in, because maybe one of the reasons why we are where we are is because we have a very similar perspective as a community.
Okay, so let's jump into that for a second. I next on my list was to talk about what's missing from Postgres to work well in cloud services, but I'll put a pin in that question. I'll try to hold my curiosity for a little bit, and let's talk about like how the Postgres community can evolve, should evolve to keep up with this growth in usage? Like, how are we going to increase the total number of contributions and contributors into Postgres? And I guess I want to start with you, Melanie, because I know you have opinions on this.
About how we can make it easier for new contributors.
Easier, or just how are we going to scale, right? Like, I hear stories that people will say, oh, my patch took 6 months to get reviewed, and that's considered good.
Yeah.
That's fast. That's fast turnaround. So,
I know what that's like as someone without a commit bit. So, but it's like we said we were going to talk about this, and I thought about it. And the problem is that I have no idea how we're going to fix it. Like, it's really bad. And every single commit fest, we talk about it, and we talk about it at our team meetings, and we talk about it and it just feels like this impossible problem. And I think that so first of all, there's technical things that we can make better and that we have been doing. So like Andres had, and several people in the community, and
Andres
Freund, yeah, and Andres Freund and some other people in the community worked on having a CI system. So there's when you can enable this on the Sura CI website through GitHub, and then you can, when you have your fork of Postgres that you're developing on and you push changes to a branch, you can have it automatically run tests on a couple different platforms. And that's super, super helpful, because a lot of times it's all you had was it works on my machine, right? And so I'm not gonna go, maybe now, but especially if you're just contributing a patch as a user, you're not gonna go and try to test it on Windows or whatever. So from just a technical accessibility perspective, I think we've been trying to make changes that make it easier for users to contribute. But I think that there is just a lack of review bandwidth for existing committers and contributors, that it just feels like this problem that we've been trying to solve for years and have not been able to figure out how to solve. And I don't know that there are good answers to it. Most of my development experience came from hands-on pair programming for 8 hours a day for months with people who are experienced database internals developers. So every time I see someone who's a new contributor writing a patch, I'm so impressed that people get off the starting line, because it's pretty hard. It's just it's not necessarily Postgres' fault. Contributing in general to a database is hard. And then, you add into it the development process being different in the Postgres community than it is for a lot of open source projects, since we don't use GitHub and things like that people always cite. But I think that one of the things that can be really hard is not necessarily getting the attention that you want for your patch. But I think that there are small things that we can do, but they're not scalable. So for example, I hold workshops where we talk about how to draw attention to not necessarily draw attention to your thread, but if you propose a patch, how, and you get feedback a lot of times, just the whole thing of oh, I need to come up with a minimal repro for this so that people that are reading this email actually can try my feature and have it be that code actually get executed, right? Someone asked this question, how do I even think about how to answer it so that the discussion moves forward? And so I think just that is the kind of thing that in my experience, the best way to do that is one-on-one pair programming. And that's obviously kind of not scalable, right? So I know there are other projects that take contributions from new contributors and are able to get them over the finish line. And we do that. Every release we do that. There are contributions by people who are not paid full-time to contribute to Postgres. But if we want to scale that, I have no idea how we're going to do it. And we spend a lot of time thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think it's a hard problem because the people who can, so as we have been discussing, there is a whole backlog of things to do. And when we like the same people who can help solve that scalability bandwidth, like by giving mentorship or by helping create processes or things to make it easier for new contributors, are the same people who are responsible for making the Postgres project move forward to commit patches. So I think balancing their time in a way where we are kind of dedicating time for mentorship and for kind of reviewing others patches, committing others patches, and also doing the tough projects, the hard projects of pushing things like direct IO, asynchronous IO, like doing those come from the same pool of people, and that makes it really hard to kind of find ways to make progress. I mean, this is a very this is a topic I think about a lot, because we have a very diverse team from a seniority level at Microsoft. Like we have committers, we have senior contributors like Melanie who don't have the commit bit, as she mentioned, and we also have junior people
who don't have the commit bit yet. Can I say yet?
Yes,
Do that whole
obviously.
growth
Yes.
mindset thing here.
Yes, absolutely. And then new people who've joined the team in the last year or so, and their challenges, like the challenges of all three stakeholders, if you can divide it into three, are so different that it's very hard to come up with a solution which works for all of them, right? So I think it's more of a people and a process problem. I think the technical challenges, as Melanie mentioned, we are making progress on them. The kind of larger process problem, I think, is the harder problem to solve. But I mean, we need to solve it as a community, otherwise, our backlog will just keep increasing and increasing.
Yeah, I'll shift the gear a bit, because I think we can also discuss a bit on, like, you can contribute to Postgres with things other than code. And I think we also have a subject matter expert on this topic in this panel, Claire. So like you're not one of the speakers, but I would also like to get your opinion, because like I know you gave a talk about contributing Postgres in ways other than code. So I think those kind of things can also increase the adoption and overall usage, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking right now about how to scale the code contributions, how to scale the number of patches, the number of fixes, the number of developers. But you're absolutely right to point out that, like, Josh Berkus drew this wonderful pie chart once where he talked about contributions to Postgres, and the code contributions to the core in particular was just a small piece of that pie. And then there's the code development work on extensions, which are outside of the core, but are absolutely a rich part of the ecosystem of what users need to run on Postgres in production. And that's just another small piece of the pie. And then there's all sorts of contributions that are really important, right? Translations of error messages, just making sure users know where to file bugs so that they get attention, so that they get fixed. There's all the blogs and all the training and all the videos that get created and then have to get shared and promoted, because if you write it, people will not read it. Like if you build it, they will not come. You need to find a way to get your learnings and your lessons out there. So yeah, there's a whole world of non-code contributions that I think are really important to the growth of any technology community and to Postgres. But I don't know that we want to dive deeper than that here today. Did I answer your question, Barak, or was there more that you wanted me to touch on?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool. So Melanie, it sounds like people in the community are talking about this at every commit fest, and it's a challenge. And there have been there are things that are happening that people are trying to get new developers off that starting line and to contribute in each new release, but you don't have all the answers yet, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think the dream scenario for everyone is that people that are not paid to contribute to Postgres full time can write patches that get committed and reviewed, and if reviewed and considered for committing if the feature makes sense, right? Like, we don't want to design an ecosystem where you have to work for a company and are paid to work on Postgres full time to contribute. And I mean, I that's my opinion. But I think a lot of other contributors would agree with that. We need people who are doing it full time, because there's obviously an amount of like just expertise and day-to-day sort of like, you know, reps that you need in order to be an open source project maintainer. Like we need maintainers basically. But I think, you know, I don't know what it is that we do to get there, but I mean, part of it is like a cultural commitment to trying to take on new, you know, non-full-time Postgres developer contributors projects as like your main feature for that release. You're going to like try to shepherd that through, and that person maybe will be the author, but like, you know, that is your first priority. Like I think stuff like that is easier said than done, but I think but that's hard, right? Like if you're employed to work on Postgres full time, then maybe like having a feature that you didn't author be the thing that you work on full time isn't as easy of a proposition, right? So.
Okay. What I'm hearing is this is a whole nother episode, right? There could be a whole conversation with a bunch of people here who are committers and contributors and talk about different ways to evolve. I know that
I spend about 3 hours to 4 hours every week having this conversation with all the stakeholders. So I think even an episode is going to be hard to do justice to this topic, because this is a genuinely hard problem.
That does sound
Yeah.
like a good idea, though, to revisit it. But I think if it's okay, Claire, maybe we move to that question you mentioned earlier. I've been really curious to hear what is missing from Postgres to work well in cloud services. Burak, do you want to start us off with that?
Sure. I mean, well, there's lots of things we can do or improve in Postgres, but I'll specifically mention two things. And actually, both of these things are we name dropped about them in our like previous questions. One of them is extensions. And Postgres is designed to be extensible from the very first day. And today, like Postgres has hundreds or even thousands of extensions because of this, like the initial design principle. But unfortunately, many of them are not well maintained. So they either lack support for latest Postgres versions, or they have some security vulnerabilities. And because of that, as a cloud provider, sometimes we are not willing to support new extensions. Like one example is like for ColomonDB for Postgres, for a very long time, we choose to not support one of the very key extensions because we know that there's a security vulnerability in that extension. And now it is fixed and we are incorporating that to our service. But I think what I realized so far is that if the extension is not backed by a company who has some it is but not for the all extension, but it is very likely that those extensions will be outdated because Postgres develops very fast, and with new versions, like with each version, if your extension is doing something non-trivial, you need to do updates or maintain your extension. This doesn't happen so easily. And because of that, the extensions may stay outdated or not support the latest Postgres versions, or they might have unfixed security vulnerabilities, which reduce the adoption. And also, even for an extension that is well maintained today, there's no guarantee that it will stay well maintained in the future. And that also adds additional, that makes cloud providers more conservative.
Okay, so before you go on to whatever's next on your list, I just want to
Yeah.
shine a light on what you just said about well-maintained extensions. There are definitely extensions out there that are well-maintained that don't have a commercial entity or interest behind them. Like, I don't know, the one that comes to mind for me is T-Digest by Thomas Vondra, like who I think is one of the lead maintainers and is super useful for calculating percentiles. And I imagine a lot of the cloud vendors support that extension. So, I mean, that's the challenge, is that you have to, as a cloud vendor, you have to decide, And there's a lot of choices about what you are going to support in your offering. And you have to be knowledgeable about what is well maintained and what is not.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, I definitely agree that like there are extensions out there who are well maintained and not backed by commercial entity. Like TDIGS is one example. PostGIS is like one of the quite big and important example. And as a cloud provider, you definitely need to be part of the community to know that those extensions are actually well maintained. So basically, there is a huge extension vetting process that we use to decide on whether we should support this extension or not in our service. So yeah, that's the one
Burak, do you have
aspect.
any ideas about what can Postgres community do for extensions, standards, frameworks? I know security is a problem for just generally just having a standard for security across the extensions. Someone on the chat, by the way, I want to mention this, brought up Timescale PGSpot, which has support for detecting vulnerabilities in extension scripts, which is great.
Yeah,
But yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think that I was going to mention the same thing. I think this is one the Timescales PGSpot. It's a really good project to, at least detect those vulnerabilities. But at the end, I think it is not just specific to Postgres, but for any open source community. If you are not like like basically the whole open source community, it is there because there are lots of people who volunteer their time and effort to make things better, or like to publish new things, like to do the support. But eventually, I think the like open source community also didn't solve this problem, right? Because like if it's not backed by a commercial entity, like as if you are a single developer doing some development in your on your laptop on your own, at some point there is no reason to keep up other than you wanting to do good for the community. I think GitHub also started, incentive and a program to support those open source projects. Maybe more extensions can be part of that somehow, so that like the authors and maintainers would have more reason to, support and maintain the extensions they created. And
I think
also,
you're
yeah.
talking about the GitHub sponsors program, I believe.
Yes, thanks for reminding me the name. I couldn't remember the name. That's one thing, and I think like all these maintainers and authors, they really deserve to get well compensated because of the contributions they made. Because like you made an extension and it might be used by lots of different companies in lots of different projects. So I think that there's this aspect of having those extensions, keeping those extensions well maintained.
So somebody who's listening to this episode for the first time and isn't that familiar with Postgres extensions, I just want to point out that while you're focused right now, I believe, on this questions of which extensions should cloud vendors support and all of the choices you have to make, and paying attention to which ones are well maintained and which ones aren't. And there are absolutely some challenges, but I also want to just give a big +1 to the original design of Postgres back in, what it was, 1985 or something like that. And that first design doc, which had as the second or third tenet, right, that there will be extensibility, because that's what's driven a lot of innovation. Like Citus wouldn't exist as it is, right? This extension that enables you to use Postgres in a distributed fashion. PostGIS is probably the number one most popular tool out there for geospatial data types and all the people with these different GIS applications. Like, some of these extensions are hugely powerful, and they've really added a lot to Postgres, and they would not have become part of the core, right? Especially with the, scaling issues around those development cycles. So I just want to say +1 for extensions. They're awesome, even with these challenges. Do you agree or
Yeah.
disagree with me, Barak?
Definitely agree. Like I'm a huge fan of extensions. Well, obviously I'm biased as someone who worked on Citus and Hyperlog extension. But yeah, like a huge +1 for extensions. I really love them.
Which is not to say that everything's perfect, and
Yeah.
clearly there are some challenges here.
Yeah.
Were there other areas that you meant to call out in terms of challenges with integrating Postgres and cloud services?
Yeah, there's one more, but this is not in terms of challenges, but I think something that we as a cloud providers should do. And this is also mentioned a bit in the previous questions, that like Postgres has lots of knobs and settings and configurations, and like there's like lots of them. And as a new user, people are usually clueless about how to get best of their database. And also, like there's also lots of diagnostic information in Postgres tables and like the statistic views. And like, for example, like cache hit ratio or long running queries or IO statistics and like lots of other things. And I think this falls down on more of a cloud provider's responsibility than the Postgres core community, because I think Postgres core community, they provide lots of useful information. But as a cloud providers, we are usually a bit behind on using them or exposing them to customers. So like one example, like I know Melanie in this, like Melanie did great work on like IO statistic and overall like the statistics framework. But at least so far, we didn't utilize that in our cloud service, and we definitely should. So I think this is more on the cloud service providers part to make those information more visible to users, like easier to discover and easier to make decisions based on those statistics. So, and using those information to allow making changes, and also even guide users to make some changes so that they can get best performance out of their database.
Sorry.
I was just going to say that Samai even mentioned earlier the need to expose even more statistics, make more statistics available to users and to cloud providers. And I'm just curious, and we can't go into this conversation today, but how many people out there are already starting to use ChatGPT, right, to try to interpret the statistics and figure out what to do? Because once you have those stats, you still have to make decisions as to how your configuration needs to change.
Yeah, I think there's like kind of three stages to this, right? The first one is just exposing the stats. The second is using those stats and making recommendations. And the third one is just doing those changes on behalf of a customer or a user, right? And I think there are improvements to be made in all three departments. I mean, by the way, just to answer your question for a specific case, I did try ChatGPT for some explain plans, and for basic explain plans, it actually gives good suggestions around creating indexes or missing indexes on columns and stuff. So it was interesting. I was fascinated by that.
There's also a lot of projects that not related to AI, but that are trying to use machine learning to like suggest and potentially alter configurations like auto tune. And I know, well, Microsoft has an internal project, MSR does, to use machine learning to tune and to base and use as input the whole fleet. I think they're focusing on SQL Server and then some of Postgres now, but to be able to actually come up with suggestions for tuning. And then there's of course like all those extensions that do index advising and things like that are not using machine learning. But so there's definitely like a push for a level of auto tuning and making suggestions. But I think like that, I get why that's happening in the larger ecosystem, but I think like as developers contributing to Postgres, there's a lot we could do just using sort of more traditional like database like concepts that were invented 20 or 30 years ago to do more adaptive optimization and tuning. So
Awesome. Well, I want to say thank you. Pino and I together want to say thank you to all four of you, Melanie, Samai, Abdullah, and Barak, for joining us today. I think that this was a pretty aggressive topic that we could probably talk about for hours. I know there are these other podcasters out there who do these 7-hour conversations, and this feels like it could have been a 7-hour conversation. But everybody does have a day job to get back to. So we should probably wrap.
Claire,
But
what's this I hear about stickers being available?
oh yeah, very important. So anybody on the chat that's happening right now, if you would like some cool Citus Ellicorn stickers, the Ellicorn is the open source mascot for Citus. It is part elephant, in homage to the Postgres mascot, and part unicorn because Citus makes Postgres magic by scaling it out horizontally. They come in lots of colors and patterns, and just tag Carol S and let her know if you would like some, and she'll we as our team will work with you to get it sent off in the mail. I think we have them for 5 people today. So anybody who wants stickers, go for it.
Oh, does that mean that hosts and guests should hang back? Leave it for the- All right,
So
well,
the other thing is just a reminder, May 3rd will be the next episode of Path to CitusCon on our Discord channel. You'll see calendar link soon if you want to add it to your calendar. And next week is CitusCon, an event for Postgres with 37 talks. There are 2 live streams, the Americas live stream on Tuesday, Pacific time, the EMEA live stream on Wednesday, European time, and then 25 talks that drop at the start of the event. And the talks are awesome. So please, I hope y'all join us. And the virtual hallway track will be here on Discord. Thank you. Thank you, Pino.
thank you,
Thank
Claire,
you.
and thanks to all our
Thanks
guests.
for having us. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks all.